back to the one thing on the book, very specific to the book, all your books are very good at first laying out what the situation is at hand, but also the predictive element to it, right? Where it's taking us, which I think is one of the things that most readers really appreciate. They're always looking for someone to help forecast the future. Now, despite this book being published in January of this year, you actually completed writing back in October of 2020.
Right.
And there's been obviously some radical things that have changed and happened in that period of time between the conclusion of your writing and publication, probably most specifically the election of Joe Biden and the installment of his administration,
right,
with the COVID vaccine becoming available. Now, despite those two big change events, and I think there was a substantial amount of the country who did not believe Biden was going to win, so pretty shocking, I think, to a lot of folks. But despite that, do those two events, the manifestation of those two events, the vaccine and the Biden administration, does that change your views and your predictions for the future in any material way?
No, I'll start with Biden, and we'll come back to the so-called vaccines. With Biden, Biden is basically doing everything possible to damage the economy. Now, I already explained why. I mean, they just passed this $1.9 trillion deficit spending bill. It was framed as COVID relief. I think it's called the American Relief Act or something, Recovery Act or something to that effect. Only about 200 billion out of the 1.9 trillion goes directly to things that you could tie to COVID. So, public health, immunization center, vaccine production, aid, hospitals, et cetera. The rest of it is just the Democratic wish list that they keep on the shelf, and they pull it off the shelf. So you're talking over $1.5 trillion of what? Child care tax credit, increased, the earned income credit is now the unearned income credit, because you get the credit even if you don't have a job. Tuition assistance, more healthcare subsidies. As I mentioned, childcare subsidies, higher unemployment benefits. People on unemployment today can make between $30,000 and $50,000 a year on unemployment. Well, if their old job was paying $28,000 a year, why would you go back to work? And the answer is you wouldn't go back to work. You would just collect the checks and so forth. So there's a long list of those things. I don't want to argue the policy of them. You can argue both ways, but my point is purely economic, which is that's not stimulative because it's all being paid for with debt. There are huge disincentives to go back to work. It affects productivity negatively. The debt itself is a headwind to growth. At these levels, we're up to in just over a year, about a year and a half, we've gone from 106% debt to GDP ratio to 130% debt to GDP, which we're now well into past the place where the Keynesian multiplier is less than one. It used to be at some levels you can borrow $1, spend $1, and get $1.20 of GDP. That's the Keynesian multiplier. Now we're at a point where you borrow $1, you spend $1, and you get maybe 50 cents of GDP. You don't even get your dollar back, but you're piling on debt nonetheless. So the debt to GDP ratio is getting worse, and the headwind is getting worse. So this is a fiasco for the economy in the guise of a relief bill. Now let's talk about the things that Biden's doing that are just flat out destructive. Shutting the Keystone XL pipeline immediately destroyed about 50,000 high-paying union jobs. These are high-paying union jobs with benefits. This is not the gig economy. This is the economy that they say they want. Those jobs have been destroyed, not coming back anytime soon. But then we're still feeling the ripple effects of that. So you shut down the pipeline, all right, the welders and fitters and the truck drivers and the engineers, all those people got fired immediately. But what about the supply chains? I mean, who's making the pipes? Who's, building the trucks that you need, et cetera? All that will get affected in stages. Stop leasing oil and natural gas and fracking permits on federal lands. Okay. There's a lot of natural gas and oil that can be fracked on federal lands. If you say no, those are future jobs that are not going to come into existence. You're raising the cost of energy. Gas at the pump is already up. The Congressional Budget Office has estimated that the Democrats' desired increase in minimum wage, that the minimum wage increase of $15, that was not in this bill, just to be clear, but it's still on the agenda. They're going to find a way to get it passed to keep Bernie Sanders happy, somewhere between now and the summer. The CBO has estimated that will cost 1.4 million jobs. That's how many people will lose their jobs or not be hired because of the minimum wage increase. And they're going to raise taxes later this year. They didn't get around to the tax bill yet. They did this COVID spending bill, but a $2 trillion tax increase is on the table. Probably that will happen by September. So you go down the list. Immigration. So opening the border. These people are coming in. They're going to work for $5 an hour. I don't care if the minimum wage is $15 an hour. If you're here illegally to begin with, what do you care about the Fair Labor Standards Act? I mean, you don't. So you'll work for $5. And it's not just people working for $5 taking a job away from an American. That happens. But what it does, it acts as a depressant on the entire wage structure of the United States. Even people who are U.S. citizens here legally, entitled to a minimum wage of $15 as an employer, why are you going to pay people anywhere close to that if there's a huge multi-million person labor pool working for $5? Well, you won't. And so it drags everybody down. And then if you require $15 and you don't want to hire the legal worker, then it's not even a question of paying them $10 because you can't. It's you don't even hire them to begin with, period. That's where the job losses come in. So put all this together. I would say even if we never had COVID, even if we never had a pandemic, the Biden program by itself is enough to put the U.S. economy into a recession. And that's an important point because go back to the Great Depression. Again, I think that's our baseline. That was two technical recessions. There was a technical recession from 1929 to 1933, and there was another technical recession from 1937 to 1938. In between, there was growth. The period from 1933 to 1936, we had pretty good growth. And actually, 1933 was one of the best years ever, percentage-wise, for the U.S. stock market. And that goes back to my point that you can have growth and a rising stock market in a depression, but you're in a zone where you never escape. You never you get off the launch pad, but you never get that escape velocity and get into orbit. So, yeah, we have expansion right now from a low level and not quite back where we were. But we could very well see a double dip recession, the first one since 1981, later this year as a result of these Biden policies. So the short answer is most of what he's doing is destructive of jobs, destructive of economic growth, on top of the fact that we were struggling to recover anyway. And the bottom line there may be a technical recession later this year. As far as the vaccines are concerned, I think it's important to know they're not traditional vaccines. I'll put the word vaccines in quotation marks. And I don't want to kind of, go too far afield on that, but this is experimental genetic modification therapy. That's what it is. The first famous vaccine, Edward Jenner noticed that milkmaids didn't get smallpox. So we said, well, how come? Why is that? Well, it turns out that they were exposed to cowpox because they were milking cows all day, and cowpox created antibodies in the human that didn't make you really sick, but did give you the antibodies that prevented you from getting smallpox. So the smallpox vaccine, the first one was really, they injected you with cowpox, mild discomfiture, but not much more. But then you got the antibodies that fended off smallpox. And the same thing, with Louis Pasteur and rabies and Salk and all the vaccines that we're familiar with. And a lot of us got as kids, I know I did. But those involve either giving you the actual virus in a weakened form or giving you something very close to the virus that was not going to make you really sick to generate the antibodies to fend off the disease. That's not what these vaccines are. This is mRNA technology, messenger RNA, which is a half a strip of DNA. It's basically a genetically engineered strip of your molecules basically that take over your cell and cause your cell to create a DNA strand. So the RNA says, give me the other pairs, and we'll make a DNA strand that generates a spike protein. And the spike protein is not the disease, but it's sufficiently similar to cause the antibodies to be created. And then in theory, you're ready if you actually get hit with the COVID. Couple things. It doesn't prevent you from getting COVID. It does prepare your body to fend it off. And apparently it's efficient, fairly efficient at that. It doesn't stop transmission. If you get COVID and if you have the vaccine or this genetic treatment and you get COVID, you might not get particularly ill, but you can still give it to others. So it doesn't affect transmission. But the spike protein never goes away. I mean, when you get the cowpox, for the smallpox, the cowpox goes away and you kind of get back to normal. So here you're engaged in genetic modification of your own body with unknown, still figuring out the side effects and possibly, I would say completely unknown long-term side effects. It's not approved by the FDA. It got an emergency waiver, so it's out there. The FDA looked at it, but it doesn't have full FDA approval. So I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I don't, it's not a rant. Get it if you want it. And for a lot of people, maybe it's a good thing. But I love, people who like, well, I would never eat a genetically modified food. I only want non-GMO organic materials. Like, well, fine. You're genetically modifying your body for life when you take this treatment.
I agree with everything you said there. All right.
Now, we field many inquiries over here regarding the viability of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general as an investment, money, store of wealth, etc. And in chapter 6 of your book, where you address investing in the post-pandemic world, there's no reference to crypto at all. Can you share your assessment of crypto and what future you see for them, possibly?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to talk about crypto. There are cryptocurrencies. There are at least 2,000 separate cryptocurrencies. I've actually done quite a bit of work on this. I haven't written about it so much in my books because I don't think it's an important subject for investors. But there are over 2,000 cryptocurrencies. They're all slightly different. Some are permissioned, some are open. Some have capped output, some have unlimited output, some can be modified, some can, etc. So they're different protocols. I mean, the blockchain is nothing new. It's been around since the 1980s. I think blockchain technology has some uses. People are starting to find them. But we're now at a point where central banks are going to start issuing their own cryptocurrencies. And the People's Bank of China already has a pilot project, and others are not too far behind. European central banks looking at it and so forth. So I think the first thing you have to say is, if you want to talk about Bitcoin, that's fine. But when you say crypto, that's a huge palette and a huge landscape. And you have to be very careful not to overgeneralize. Again, I would say blockchain is useful, cryptos, not so much. Bitcoin, I still haven't found the use case for it as a form of gambling. I think it's, when in the early 1960s, I used to go to teenage dances. There was a song called, "Shout, shout, knock yourself out." And if you want to buy Bitcoin, knock yourself out. I mean, I'm not railing against it. It's not a reliable store of value because you look at the price chart. It's not a useful medium of exchange because you can't buy anything with it. The Bitcoin groupies used to say, well, there's a coffee shop in Brooklyn and you can go in and use Bitcoin to buy coffee. I think that coffee shop is probably closed right now, but the point is you really can't buy anything with it. I'm sure you can find a bagel shop somewhere. It barely makes it past the currency test of medium of exchange. Unit of account, well, it's like a yardstick that goes like this. I mean, it's not really a yardstick, but it's there. It's a form of gambling. I've got nothing against gambling. I prefer roulette because you can hold a drink and enjoy the ambiance a little bit. I see Bitcoin, it has some intrinsic value based on the mining costs, which, by the way, it's another thing, all these progressives, in Silicon Valley people, we love Bitcoin. It's like, yeah, most of them are mined in China and they use more electricity than the country of Argentina to do so. And the electricity comes from coal burning plants. So think about Bill Gates made this point the other day, but I was saying this 5 years ago. Think about the CO2 emissions that are behind the mining of Bitcoin. And if you like coal-fired plants, then again, knock yourself out by all the Bitcoin you want. But just to flip over to a more serious critique based on monetary economics, I think Bitcoin is a good example, a good evidence of the fact that really good applied mathematicians and computer coders know nothing about monetary economics. Because you go back to the source of Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he, she, or it was, and if it wasn't like a team from Raytheon, created this, but they leaked some material in his or her or its name, which ranted about central banks. Central banks, they print too much money, they cause inflation, they abuse their privileges. We need a currency that's going to be capped, and that'll prevent inflation. Well, that's wrong. The total Bitcoin output is capped. I think it's around 21 million coins. I forget the exact number, but it's around 21 million coins. But the amount of power and computing capacity you need to mine each incremental coin goes up. And at the end, it goes up exponentially. So you'll never get there. We're practically there now. I think we're around, 18, 19 million coins. We're getting closer to the end, but someday there's going to be, okay, that's it. No more Bitcoin, because you're going to need the power of the sun to mine one more Bitcoin, and it's not going to make sense. And that was supposed to prevent central banks abuse. Well, central banks have abused their money creating powers, and they have bungled time and time again. There's no question about that, but they don't have to. I mean, they could actually get it right. But the idea is economic growth grows, it progresses. And you need a money supply that grows with the economy. Now, gold is very good for that, by the way. Everyone thinks there's a fixed supply of gold. There isn't. But gold expands through mining at about 1.6% a year. That's the amount of additional output relative to the total supply, the above ground supply. That's about in line with global population growth. It's slightly less than global economic growth on average, but it's close enough. It's closer than anything else you can point to. So the part of the monetary strength of gold is that it actually does grow in roughly in line with the economy. You can make a paper money supply do the same thing if you want to. We haven't done that, but you could. But the problem with Bitcoin, when you cap the money supply, go, here's the money supply, and the economy is going to keep growing like we're going to keep this cap. Well, the first approximation is that, well, this has to be worth more and more, because when you cap it, it's deflationary. Each coin gets you a bigger piece of this pie. This pie keeps growing. The number of coins is fixed. So each coin gets you a bigger piece of the pie. So the nominal value should go up. And that's people like Glenn Hutchins and Ray Dalio. It's kind of what they're thinking. But the problem with that is if you actually want to be a reserve currency or a transactional currency, when people say, the dollar is the leading reserve currency or the euro is the number 2 reserve currency, that's a bit of a misstatement. The currency reserves are not kept in currencies, they're kept in bonds. Now, the bonds are denominated in currency. So when people say 60% of reserves are in the US dollar, it's not like the People's Bank of China has pallets of $100 bills stacked up in the basement. They don't. What they own are US Treasury securities, bills, notes, and bonds denominated in dollars. In other words, the thing that makes you a reserve currency is not the currency, it's the bond market. Well, there is no Bitcoin bond market, and there never will be. Why? For the same reason I just mentioned, which is the currency is inherently deflationary. To have a bond market, you need investors, but you also need borrowers. Who's going to borrow in a currency that keeps getting stronger? You end up owing, in real terms, you end up owing more than you borrowed, not counting interest. I mean, interest is separate, but if borrowers like to borrow in inflationary currencies because they can pay back less, and hopefully we'd have price stability. But the point is, nobody's going to borrow in an intrinsically deflationary currency because you end up paying back more than you borrowed, which means there'll never be a bond market, which means it'll never be a reserve currency, which means it's just a gambling tool. So there are lots of serious flaws in Bitcoin. Don't even get me started on Tether, which the evidence is very good that Bitcoin itself is the greatest Ponzi in the history of the world, makes Bernie Madoff look like a Girl Scout, because most of the Bitcoin buying is from Tether, and Tether has never accounted for the dollars. They claim to have them in a Bahamian bank, but the amount of dollars invested in Tether is a high multiple of the entire dollar assets of the entire Bahamian banking system. So that can't be true, and they've never been audited, but that's a story for another day.
Jim, I just want to,
thank you.
one thing you talked about before, and it has to do with the spending that's occurred with the stimulus spending because of COVID. Um, Now, you talk about what's coming out now. It's just really a Democratic wish list, right? But I know the more progressive constituencies really want something more permanent, right? So just what do you think the probability of an adoption and the launch of at least what they would like as a permanent form of a universal basic income or some other, radical, more radicalized socialist program like that would be basically try to make it a permanent fixture of the economy?
Well, I think it's a high probability. I think it's already happening. I think if you go through the new bill, the $1.9 trillion relief act or American Relief Act or whatever it's called, item by item, what you see is universal basic income. Now, it's sliced into 20 different flavors. So here's a child care credit. Here's a earned or unearned income tax credit. Here's some medical assistance. Here's higher unemployment benefits. But if you add it all up, and a lot of these things are based on individuals, not households, which means if you have 3 or 4 people in a household, you could actually get 4 times the headline number. If you add it all up, you're looking at between $15,000 and $35,000 per household, or per individual, or again multiplied by the number of people in the household, could be even higher. Well, that's it. There's your universal basic income right there. Now they say, well, we need higher unemployment benefits because of the pandemic. Okay. We need more healthcare benefits because people need. You can, again, I don't want to debate the policy. You can argue every one of these from both sides of the issue. But as an analyst, you look at it. Now, if they say, well, we're going to have 1.9 trillion universal basic income, we're just going to send everybody a $30,000 check and keep doing it. That never would have passed. But that's what they did. And so some of these programs have a life of 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever. But when they get to that endpoint, they're going to extend it. Now, the Democrats are in a really big hurry here because they may, I'm not forecasting this, but this is certainly a real possibility. They may lose the House of Representatives. The Democrats may lose the House of Representatives and may lose the Senate in 2022. And they know it. They had the same situation in 2008 when Obama won the first time. They controlled the Senate and the House of Representatives. They lost the House in 2010 because of the Tea Party movement. They lost the Senate in 2014. And so they really only had a 2-year window where they could do whatever they wanted. And they didn't. They passed Dodd-Frank and Obamacare, big bills. That was big legislation. But they did not fundamentally restructure the U.S. economy. So now they're back. They're more progressive than ever, more left-wing than ever, more socialist than ever. But they remember what happened in 2010 with the Tea Party. So they're saying, hey, we may only have 2 years to do this. And we better move fast. And they are moving fast. But there's what I call the progressive ratchet. Ratchet is a tool. You turn it one way, but it won't turn back. It locks in place. And that's the way progressive legislation works. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare. These things are very controversial when they're being enacted, but once they're in place and people get those checks, they never go away. And so what's happening politically is that the far left, the progressive movement, which is pretty much taken over the Democratic Party, they have control. It's narrow, very skinny margins. They may lose them in 2 years, but they know that. And so they're working as fast as they can to get all this stuff in place. But the stuff is, in effect, if you add up all these separate programs and just put one label around it, it really is guaranteed basic income. We're there. And you get people like Mark Zuckerberg who favor this, and others. All these guys worth $100 billion. They think you should be on welfare, right? I should be on welfare. But what happens is we're seeing this in the labor force participation rate. These are the people who are unemployed but are not counted as unemployed because they're not looking for a job. Well, if you're a bartender in a town where all the bars are closed, what's the point of looking for a job? And if you don't have a job, but you're not counted as unemployed. If that group, able-bodied, prime age, 25 to 50-year-old workers, were added to the unemployed, the actual unemployment rate would be over 11%, not the 6.2% or so that they're talking about. And so, Mark Zuckerberg wants a world where everyone sits home and plays with Facebook. Jeff Bezos wants a world where everyone sits home and shops on Amazon. And Netflix wants a world where everyone sits home and watches TV. and don't worry about the money, we'll send you a check. Well, we're just about there.
Agreed.
Jim, part of the process in your predictive model involves studying history. And within that framework, you brought up Graham Allison's Thucydides trap. What do you feel is the likelihood of armed conflict between the US and China in the near future?
Well, yeah, near future, probably low. Both sides blustering a little bit. The U.S. Navy's doing what are called, freedom of navigation passages through the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. We're sending aircraft carriers in there. Our allies are joining us, the Australians and the Royal Navy. Even some Japanese Navy vessels are in there as well. And China has adopted what they call wolf warrior diplomacy. Wolf warrior was a very popular television series in China. I don't know, it was like Matlock or Columbo or something, who knows what, but now they're diplomats who are saying we're wolf warrior diplomats, which basically means they're being very blunt, very critical, very disparaging of the United States, which was not traditionally the case. Deng Xiaoping said, basically, keep your head down, bide your time. He didn't mean that China wasn't getting stronger. He didn't mean that he didn't think China would be powerful in the future. But what he meant was that the less you talk about it, the more you could get away with it. That's gone. Xi Jinping has thrown that out. And now with the wolf warriors, they're like, no, they're right in your face. So it looks threatening, but I think both sides know that for the time being, at least the U.S. has what we want. I mean, Taiwan is de facto independent. India is growing, Australia is growing. We have this, what we call the Quad. The Quad is, Japan, Australia, India, and the United States, creating a kind of containment perimeter around mainland China, not letting them, have too much influence outside that perimeter in terms of the Philippines and Southeast Asia and elsewhere. So, but longer term, the Thucydides trap, is a reference to, Thucydides, who wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, and that was adopted by Graham Allison. And he said, when you have an established power and a rising power, their interests conflict and it comes to war. And that was the origin of the Peloponnesian War. And that's pretty much what happened. So now the established power is the United States and the rising power is China. And Thucydides was talking about Athens and Sparta. So Sparta was the established power. Athens was the rising power. Today, the US is the established power. China is the rising power. And so the metaphor is that the US and China could come to a conflict the way Athens and Sparta did because of this dynamic. And that's certainly possible. It's a good thesis to bear in mind. But I remind people that Sparta won. In other words, Sparta, the established power, won the Peloponnesian War. And by the way, part of the reason they won was because there was a pandemic in Athens. So I guess the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Hey, Jim, I know we're going to wrap up because our time is coming toward the end. So I do have to ask the question that I know everyone always comes at you with, because the viewers are very concerned. I know what you've been predicting is, as I said, has been unfolding. So, and just the subtitle of your book alone says "Winners and Losers in a Post-Pandemic World." Well, I guess it gives at least a little hope, because you do say there are some winners. And I guess it has to do with those who are wise enough to kind of position themselves as best you can for what's taking place. So with that said, for the majority of investors, what would be the best, or what continues to be the best and most realistic way to preserve some wealth, so that as we go through this meat grinder, they come out the other end with something that's intact?
Well, again, at the risk of stating the obvious, you want diversification. That sounds easy, but the problem is most people don't understand what real diversification is. I run into people and they say, well, I'm highly diversified. I've got 30 different stocks in 10 different sectors. I've got technology, semiconductors, consumer non-durables, utilities, et cetera. I'm highly diversified. And I say, no, you're not. You may have 30 stocks, but you have one asset class. It's called stocks. And they're highly correlated, and they go up together and they go down together. So, get ready for the roller coaster. Real diversification means different asset classes. So there's room for a slice for stocks. I recommend a big slice of cash. Maybe not forever, certainly not in a highly inflationary environment, which may be coming in a couple of years. But in the meantime, that reduces volatility and gives you, people underestimate the embedded optionality in cash. It has very low yield. First of all, it's a good performing asset in deflation. The real value is going up. But if you're the person with cash, you can pivot as we get more information. You want to go over here, you want to go over here. If you have cash, you can do it. Whereas if you're in a private equity fund, good luck. You decide you want to get out. Good luck getting your money back from Henry Kravis. So cash is valuable, but I've always recommended a 10% allocation to gold. And I know gold's had a rough patch here, but you have to adopt a broader perspective. So we're in the third great bull market in the history of gold. And it's not a very long history. Gold goes back 5,000 years, but it's never really had bull markets and bear markets because it was always money, not just one kind of money, but it was the money. You thought about value in terms of weight of gold. Since 1971, when our foreign trading partners could no longer get gold for dollars, they could buy other stuff, but they couldn't get the gold. But at the same time, gold went into a kind of a free market. So we had two bull markets, 1971 to 1980. Gold went up over 2,000%. Then there was a long, slow decline, really almost a 20-year bear market. Then a new bull market emerged in 1999. Gold was $250 an ounce. It went up to $1,900 an ounce in August 2011. That was a 670% increase. Then a sharp bear market between 2011 and 2015. The third bull market began on December 16th, 2015. You can pick this spot. It was $1,050 an ounce. It was the day after Janet Yellen did the liftoff, the first interest rate increase in 9 years, and it's up since then. So even at $1,700, you're still up 70% relative to the 1050, or about 68%. So yeah, it's drawn down from the all-time high of $2,070 an ounce in August 2020. But it's still up almost 70% from the low. So the bull market's alive and well. So what's causing gold to draw down right now? And it has gone down steeply in the past few weeks. The answer is simple. I mean, sometimes the answer is complicated. Geopolitics and inflation, all this stuff. The answer is simple. Interest rates are going up. Not the policy rate. The policy rate's stuck at zero. But the 10-year note yield to maturity has gone just in a matter of weeks from about 90 basis points to 1.6%. Doesn't sound like a lot. That's an earthquake in the bond market. And if you look at two charts, as interest rates go up and the dollar goes up, gold goes down. It's that simple. I mean, at least it has been in this case. I always say, if you wonder how the dollar is doing, don't look at the euro, look at gold. A higher dollar price for gold is a weak dollar, and a lower dollar price for gold is a strong dollar. So lately we've had a stronger dollar because of interest rates. And so gold is going down. But here's the point. We've seen this movie before. Interest rates have gone up. Again, talking about yield to maturity on 10-year treasury note, 4 spikes in the last 10 years. And at every spike, it turned around abruptly and came down to a new low. And then the next spike was not as high as the last high. That's a pattern technicians call lower highs, lower lows. So are we getting a little spike right now? Yeah. But the prior spikes were, 2.5%, 3.5%, et cetera. Now everyone's in a panic about 1.6%. Well, fine, that's a spike. Gold is down, but it's a lower spike than the last one and the one before and the one before. So that downtrend is still there. And so what's going to turn around the interest rate on the 10-year note? Well, everything we've been talking about in the last hour, which is weaker economic growth, bad policies in the Biden administration, lingering effects of the pandemic, et cetera. So for interest rates to be that high, that's a headwind for the economy. Now, so why are interest rates going up? Interest rates are going up because of all the spending and expectations of inflation. All right, if that's true, interest rates should go up. But we just explained at length why the spending is not going to be stimulative, why we're not actually going to get the inflation, at least in the short run. So interest rates will turn around again. But here's the point, Chris, and this is really the big point, the takeaway for people who invest in gold or hold gold. One of two things is true. Either I'm right and interest rates are going to come down and gold's going to skyrocket, or I'm wrong and inflation comes along, in which case gold is going to skyrocket. In other words, gold wins either way. Gold wins if the economy slows and interest rates come down, gold's going to go right back up. If inflation appears and interest rate increases are justified and go up even more, then gold's going to go up on the inflation. What we have now is the worst of all possible worlds, which is interest rates are going up on inflationary expectations, but there's no actual inflation. That's a bad recipe for gold because it makes gold go down. Be like, well, where's the inflation? Well, we don't actually have any. So either rates come down and gold goes up, or the rates are indicative of inflation and gold goes up. So I think it wins either way. But right now we're just in a bad patch because rates are going up on expectations, but not actual inflation. And that is a difficult environment. But it could change in one of two ways, but they're both extremely bullish for gold.
I'll concur. And I'm just going to say real quickly, I've been in this business for 2 decades now, and which is basically the start the start of the secular bull market for gold started 2 decades ago, 2001.
Right.
We've been through this routine multiple times, right? Gold up, it gets knocked down, everyone panics, weak hands sell, strong hands accumulate, little ways down the road, it's higher. And I don't see any difference this time. As a matter of fact, the drivers behind all this are way more intense than they were 10 years ago and 5 years ago. So I concur. Just stay strong, hold your position. Jim, look, I really want to thank you for coming on. It was great catching up with you. It's been a long time since we talked. I appreciate everything you shared with everyone today. And just a reminder, if you really want to go way beyond what we talked about today, because we really just scratched the surface, this is Jim's new book, The New Great Depression. Definitely recommend this. Great companion to the whole series of books that Jim has made available to us. So for everyone here at Neptune Global, I'd like to say thank you for viewing. Jim, again, thanks for coming on. And John,
Thank you.
Sure, and thank you for the show. If you like what you saw today and you'd like to get alerted by our next video when it comes out, just please subscribe. And if you hit the like button, that's also great. Again, thank you, everyone, and talk to you soon.
Thank you.